You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. We've done back-to-back FDNY shows now. Of course, Fridays was an FDNY show. Tonight's an FDNY show. What I like about this one is there's many different components of the fire department that you can showcase, especially a fire department as large as New York City's, where, for example, last episode, if you haven't checked that one out, that was episode 344, we had Joel Kanaski. And Joel Kanaski was a longtime member of Rescue 1 in Manhattan. What's nice about tonight is that we get to showcase the EMS side of the FDNY, which is his own division. But paramedics and EMTs on FDNY EMS are a critical part of their operation, especially since the merger in 1996. And tonight's guest was heavily involved in that, really going back to when it was his own separate agency, an independent agency under the Health and Hospital Corps at the time. So that's what we like about tonight's episode for sure. We've had that before when Chief Zach Goldfarb and, of course, Chief Steve Kerr were on, and we have to shed a spotlight on that. Tonight we'll do that with our guest who we'll introduce in a moment. As I mentioned, the previous episode was volume 63 of this same miniseries with Joel Kanaski, formerly of Rescue 1. And he was in Rescue 1 in Manhattan from 1998 until 2014. Hello to everyone tuning in. As always, if you have some comments or questions that you would like me to highlight during the course of the interview, throw them in there. And just a brief sports thought. I was talking about this with producer Vick off the air. Those of you know I root for the New York Yankees, and I'm pretty disgusted with how they're being run these days. Juan Soto, who helped the Yankees get to their first World Series in 15 years. Of course, you saw the news voltage for the New York Mets. Same city, staying in the city, doesn't have to move. 15 years, $765 million. And I say this, and some people are saying good riddance. I say good for him. You're a generational player. You have quite a future ahead of you. You've already accomplished so much, and you're not even 26 yet. If you can get a contract like that as an athlete, hey, get it. And he did. Broke the record, richest professional contract in the history of sports, any sport. And that'll be the standard for quite some time. And you know what? New York Yankees, as I've said before in columns and a little bit on this program, are not very serious about winning. They're not serious about putting together a competent collective team as they were in years past. They've lost their way as an organization. And if you think Brian Cashman, who has not been able to put together a successful championship-winning roster since 2009, is going to use the $760 million he has to spend now wisely, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. So that's my thoughts on that. We'll now run some ads and we'll transition from the meaningless world of sports to the more meaningful world of first responders. First things first, MC Media Editing Services. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And while the world of sports may let you down, you know who doesn't let you down? Billy Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. All righty. My next guest is a dedicated and accomplished veteran of emergency medical services. It's a realm he's been involved in for about 4 decades now. He volunteered for a long time with Bravo Ambulance as a teenager, and that would segue to New York City EMS, like I said, back when it was its own agency pre-merger with the FDNY in 1996. And along the way, of course, he'd take part in that merger when it came to be in the spring of 1996 under the direction of then Commissioner Howard Safir, and responded to many different incidents, including both attacks in the World Trade Center in 1993 and 2001, in which he'll discuss that with me tonight. He retired in 2022 as a division chief, although he's still very active in the private sector now. Work has not stopped for him. And that for this volume 64, the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite FDNY EMS Division Chief, Jay Swithers. Chief, welcome. How are you? Great to have you.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? It's good to be here.
Oh, good to see you. And hello to everybody, of course, in the chat. And like I said, if you have a question for the Chief, fire it away. So, take me through your early years. You're a Bay Ridge, Brooklyn kid, originally out of there. Take me through your early years growing up there. And if early on you knew you wanted to be involved in the world of first responders somehow.
All right, Mike. Well, when I was a kid in Bay Ridge, there wasn't a Bravo volunteer ambulance yet. There was just the city ambulances, and Lutheran Medical Center ran an ambulance. And I remember we were playing ball one day, and a kid ran out into the street, and we heard pow, screeching brakes, and pow, and the kid went up in the air and crashed down on the ground. And he was bleeding from the head. He was gurgling. The police came. They actually chalked his body before the ambulance actually got there. And I said, wow, like as a kid, that was traumatizing. We all went home and prayed for him. And the next day we were talking to the mother and the father. And it was an experience of like saying, how could you wait so long for an ambulance? Like it seemed like it was an hour. And the guys that just came, they just kind of lifted him up and threw him on a stretcher and drew him in the back of what we called a bread truck ambulances back then. They looked like they were the same thing as a bread truck. Yep. They weren't EMTs. They were just ambulance drivers. Maybe they had some training, but I was a kid. I didn't know much. And the fascination continued as I was in grammar school. And Bravo Volunteer Ambulance just started in 1975. I was probably 12 years old, 7th grade teacher. I thought the world of him. His name is Michael Dealey. He was such a cool guy who did karate, did a lot of things involved with the students, and he allowed us to call him Michael. And that was really cool because that didn't happen back in the 70s. One day he comes in with his books and he says, I'm really tired today, so we're going to have to take it easy. And we're like, why is he tired? What's going on? And he said, I volunteered at Bravo last night. And we looked up and said, Bravo what? And he said, Bay Ridge Ambulance Volunteer Organization. They're saving Bay Ridge. And we're like, what? What is that? And he goes, I'm an EMT. And we're like, he's also an EMT. How cool is that? And he proceeded to tell us stories about a car accident and somebody else. And he was a really great storyteller. So I think the influence is mostly comes from Michael Dealey, who would tell these stories. And I said, how can I get involved? He says, you're only 12 years old. In order to get into the U Squad, you have to be 14. Now, my birthday is September 11th, 1961. So, I had a couple more years to go, but I knew that my application was going to be in on my birthday, and it was on my 14th birthday. And I did get into the U Squad. Another influence, but everybody in the EMS world would say the same thing. They watched Emergency on television. And I get it. And I think it's actually on TV right now. People should be watching this though. The episodes of John and Roy, the amazing things they did as the first paramedics in the country, they were so cool. And everybody who's in the EMS, who's my age, would tell you that was a good major influence. But I think Michael Dealey's stories were more incredible.
Especially because he was living it, in real time,
yeah.
Along with wearing so many other hats, being a teacher, practicing martial arts, and going out there and working in the community. And you see that in different places, not just in the big city like New York, but different places across the country, volunteer ambulance corps, which are essential now because, listen, it's especially with the wait times being what they are. If you can get an ambulance out there quicker, it's imperative. Not every city or town has the budget to have paid staff. So that's where the volunteerism is really imperative. And we're thankful that people take the time to do such an important community service.
Yeah, when I was in the U Squad, I was a little bit disappointed because it was like a lot of bake sales and cake sales and car washes, fundraisers. We did some training, not a whole lot. For me, I was a nerdy kid, and it was 90% girls. So I was in, but nobody paid attention to me. We go to dances and the boys would sit on the side and the girls would be out there dancing. It's a time of disco in Bay Ridge. John Travolta was hot and
Right.
happening. It was a fun time, but I remember taking a first aid course and just like learning direct pressure for bleeding. And it always would be that in my life, something that would happen as a result of taking the first aid course. And I was standing on a corner waiting for a bus to go to school. And it was crazy. It was a barber shop, and the barber had a fight with a customer, and he slashed his neck.
Wow.
And the carotid artery is bursting, blood pulsating. And I ran over with like a towel that another guy came over, and I held it against the guy's neck. And somebody did call Bravo that morning. And the Bravo ambulance people early in the morning going to school, they're probably looking forward to the shift ending. They casually walk over and say, "So what's going on here?" And I said, "The guy's bleeding from his neck. I think it's the carotid artery." And he says, "Well, let me take a look." I said, No, don't look, don't take it off. Sure enough, the guy pulls the towel off, and it's blood shooting in, directly on the uniforms of the Bravo people. Somebody then came over to me and they said, "You probably saved that guy's life." And I said, "I don't think so." Maybe I did say I probably did, maybe to get a little bit of attention, but it was an experience that one of my first experience of actually doing something after learning a little bit about first aid.
Right. And as you're telling that story, I'm thinking back to, there was a horrific, he lived, thankfully, similar situation in hockey. You may recall goalie Clint Malarchuk had something similar where a skate came up, cut his neck, and the trainer, I believe he's on the Buffalo Sabres at the time, happened to be a World War II combat medic. So he'd seen some things. Same thing, pinched the artery. That's the only reason Clint Malarchuk's still with us today. He pinched the artery. So that's important. So usually something like that could very well be fatal. You're talking about an artery being severed, any artery, whether it be carotid, femoral, that arterial, that's going to kill you 9 times out of 10. What can save you, and that's the reason why it's 9 times out of 10 on the 10th time, is quick action, which happened there, thankfully.
Yeah. I was in the youth squad all those years, and did whatever. Not a whole lot of training, but it was good. They let us on the ambulance here and there, and I really wanted to get into this as a senior squad person. Mm-hmm. So later on, after the youth squad, I joined the senior squad, and that was, I guess, 1980, because my shield number is 80003, which means I was the third person who came on board in 1980. And it was then that I decided to take an EMT class. I did a little bit of college, in and out. I was delivering pizzas, and I wound up working for a printing company. And every shift that I could possibly work, I would go to Bravo and work a shift. Unfortunately, volunteer ambulances aren't as popular anymore. It's hard to get people to volunteer. The building is closed frequently. But it was open all the time, 24/7, doing the midnight shifts. On the weekends, we had 2 ambulances doing hundreds of calls every month, hundreds and hundreds of calls. And the reason why the people from Bay Ridge would call Bravo, because if they knew they called 911, they were going to be waiting 30, 40 minutes for an ambulance. And it's one thing that I keep on saying over and over again: there's nothing greater than the heart of a volunteer. Nothing bigger than the heart of a volunteer. I always felt as if, like, when you put on that uniform, the people would be, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming." We marched in parades in Bay Ridge, and the people would be yelling, "Bravo, bravo," and clapping as we walked. And they still do that. But the organization, it's a great organization, but we need volunteers to fill our seats. And I always thought that I have to give back, because so many great people have taught me great things. I know in the organization is a woman, her name is Eileen Okroff, and she was one of my instructors years ago, and she's still in the organization. A lot of great people in the organization. Tim Drain, who was a retired police officer who died of cancer, taught me to drive the ambulance. So many great connections, and it's great for the young people to network. a lot of people, they want to become nurses, but they don't have, going into nursing school, they don't have any hands-on opportunity to say they did patient care, actually did blood pressures on patients, bandaged them, gave them oxygen, and did presentations at the hospital. I love going out now and having that opportunity to mentor, these new folks. I sometimes I would actually say, we're 4 people on the ambulance, and your 3 ages together aren't equivalent to mine. It's been a great experience, and I really wanted to go into it more. And I decided in 1984 that I was going to put it in my application to work under HHC, NYC EMS. And my best friends, Jimmy Nealon, Billy Kilps, and myself, we joined the academy together on 4/9/84. And we went through the academy. I think it was 6 or 8 weeks at the time. And we thought we had a hook. That we were going to go to Bellevue or Coney Island. And the 3 of us got sent to Harlem. I thought they were kidding when they said Harlem. I said, what happened to our hook? But I'm going to tell you, Harlem was hard back then. It was the 80s, 1984, opiates, methadone.
Crack is whack.
Oh God, there was zombies walking the streets, and these streets that you look at now that they're multi-million-dollar houses, brownstones, they were empty, vacant, and there were people living, homeless people living in these crack dens, and it was trauma, shootings. It had to be a shooting every half hour. The whole time I was at Bravo, I never saw a shooting. And my first week in Harlem, I think I saw 5 people shot. The heroin was crazy back then, and the only people that actually had Narcan were paramedics. It's not like it was now. Now, you go to a call for an overdose, and the police show up, the fire shows up, and the EMS shows up, and everybody's drawing up their Narcan to see who could give it first. And be the person who saved the person's life. As many of us know, the person looks like they're dead, barely breathing or not breathing, and we give Narcan, and within minutes, most of them, the receptor that caused the person to go unconscious and stop breathing, Narcan blocks that action, and the person's up and talking. It's almost like a miracle. I've seen it in movies like Bringing Out Your Dead, where the guy gives the Narcan, and the people are praying, and the next thing they know, the guy's up and talking. I don't know if you saw that movie, Mike, but it's
no, I can't say that I have. It's always funny. Not that you're happy these people are, or not that it's funny, rather, that these people are in this type of situation. But when they revive, they're upset because you ruined their high. That's the ironic part. They're upset. They're
allergic to it. Nobody's allergic to it.
Yeah.
I like to tell you one of my stories of Harlem when I was working there as an EMT. I was working with a new guy, and once again, he's never been to Harlem. He's from Long Island. He's in culture shock.
Right.
But I was there maybe 3 months, and I knew what was going on. But we had to do a call, and actually, I'm going to correct myself. This call actually happened when I was transferred back. I was transferred to Bellevue, but every night I was working a tactical patrol unit, and that unit would go to Harlem. So I never got to leave Harlem, even when I got to leave. It's just that because Harlem was a place, or the South Bronx, the call volume was very high. So it would take these tactical patrol units that they could put anywhere and just keep them in Harlem or in the South Bronx all the time. So we were up there, and the folks up in Harlem didn't appreciate there being outsiders, like a different unit from Bellevue is in our area. So we didn't always get along, although we did get along very well. It was just a matter of who's doing the calls and what type of calls they're doing. But we were doing a call on a corner where we had this guy who had open ulcerations of his legs because of his heroin addiction, homeless, doesn't want to go to the hospital. And I was wrapping up his legs with bandages. And suddenly in the nighttime, we hear pow, 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 which was not uncommon. You would hear shootings like every hour, something, sirens. So I see a crowd of people running out of one of the streets. And this is like across of Lenox and 146th Street. And it's on the side street. And I tell my partner, I'm going to grab my bag. I'm going to run to the patient. You bring the ambulance around. So I grabbed my bag. And at the time, we had cardboard boxes is what the city gave us that were covered with like lining. And you had to go out and get something cooler. So I had a camera bag. That's what I bought. And I had all my bandaging stuff and my bag valve mask and my oral airways and everything was in there. And I ran with my oxygen in my bag. And as I was running out down the block, the people were running the opposite direction. I got to a brownstone that had like a little area on the first floor, cemented, and a gate. And I saw a guy laying there and he was barely breathing. And I went in there and I pulled out my bag valve mask. The bag valve masks back then, they were not disposable. You had to wash them. And actually, we weren't given those.
Really?
We used to have to go into the hospital and kind of like just take one. And then you would wash it after every call. The mask sort of actually started to smell like vomit because of the amount of vomit in the plastic. But we would wash it and take care. So I take out this BVM, bag valve mask, or otherwise sometimes called the amble bag back in the 70s. And I start ventilating this guy. And I hear somebody yell, "Stop." And I look up and there's a guy holding a gun. And he's waving it back and forth, pointing it at me, pointing it at him. And he said to me, is he going to live or is he going to die? And I said, he's going to die. And he took the gun and he pointed it at his forehead and he shot. And it was almost like, for me, it was like slow motion, as if I could watching the bullet going through
at the victim or at himself?
At himself, the victim.
Okay.
No, not himself, the victim. He shot at the victim, who was already shot once or twice. And now the bullet goes right into his forehead. It's like I can almost see the splash of blood. And I look down, and then he shoots the bag valve mask like a couple different times. Pow, pow, pow. So with that, he hears the sirens and he runs. And I'm all by myself. Mike, I'm the only white guy there. It's like,
that was my next question.
Yeah. So I start to squeeze the bag and the air is going out all different directions. And I'm scared. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw this. The ambulance that pulls up isn't my ambulance. My partner is lost. It's another Harlem ambulance. And these two girls that are like heavy set black girls that, as if they do this every half hour, get out of the ambulance with the scoop. They push the guy onto the scoop. They hip check me out of the way. They carry the scoop to the ambulance. They put him in the ambulance and they close the door on me. And then my ambulance is coming up right behind them and they take off. And I jump into the ambulance. I said, follow that ambulance. They're going to Harlem Hospital. And we follow the ambulance. We get to the hospital. And I remember they had the guy intubated in the hospital on a ventilator. And he still has the hole in his head, unbandaged. It's just dripping. His eyes are fixed and dilated. Pupils are fixed and dilated. And I have to say, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been through this. Is this the time of day that you say, maybe I should quit this? It's too dangerous. But as I was walking out, the EMT was on the phone with the dispatcher making fun of me. And she was on the payphone with her back towards me. And I'm waiting to talk to her because I got my BVM. And I wanted to talk to her, but she was on the phone. And she goes, that unit from Bellevue, they got blank as equipment. I was squeezing that BVM and air was shooting all over the place. She had no clue that the BVM, the bag valve mask, was shot.
Goodness.
So that was like an adventure. That was an adventure, but I have to say there were a lot of them. A lot of them that they're still happening. That BVM, I brought it home. I washed it. I brought it home, and it was a kid that lived in the apartment building next to my apartment. He was a buff, and I showed it to him, and he says I could put bicycle patch, uh, bicycle tire patches on that BVM, and he did. And I used it for another bunch of years. And then people looked at it and said, "Are these bicycle patches?" I said, "Yeah, they are." I said, "It was shot."
Yeah. I mean, early on, talk about trial by fire. But that's what life was like for you guys back then. Because, as I've talked about before, and those of you that lived through it, rather if you were on FD back then, like Garrett Linger in the chat, or PD like Kenny Bowen in the chat, New York City EMS was doing a lot with less. The call volume was through the roof, and you guys had no resources. And I think a lot of people kind of got down on the agency during that time period because of the wait times, things like that. You may remember the Public Enemy song, 911 is a joke. That wasn't the fault of the guys and gals in the street that were working hard. It's just they were so depleted resource-wise. Hats off to you guys. I don't know how you did it, especially in neighborhoods like that were so dangerous.
Yeah. I look back and say, I don't know how I did it. I'm 63 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working at NYU Brooklyn full time as a paramedic. And I have to say, I don't have the strength that I used to, but the things we used to do by ourselves, now you could call for help and within minutes, somebody's going to come.
Right.
The
response times are great.
And I'm blessed because I'm a retired chief. And if the engine company is there, these firefighters, they don't let me lift. And I said,
Right.
You're spoiling me. I'm not going to have you tomorrow. But I'd like to tell you another story of my Harlem experiences. We get a call for a labor, and I have to say, people back then, they waited to the last minute. And in Harlem, you delivered babies I don't want to say one after the other, but you could deliver a baby one a month easily in Harlem. They're easy to deliver. They gave us crap as equipment. They have a little plastic bag with a scalpel, clamps, a little, thing, bulb syringe to clean the airway, and that was it. And we go up to this apartment building, and half of the apartment building is empty, or let's say there are people squatting in it, but they don't belong there. And we go into this apartment, and it's snowing outside, and they have plastic on the windows, and the plastic is just shaking left and right, and there's a makeshift light, and my partner's there, and the lady says, "I think I'm going to have the baby now." And we're like, okay, we're on the third floor. It's just the two of us. And I take a look, and the baby's crowning. And I said, "It looks like we're going to deliver a baby." But the baby comes breech, but it's the buttocks. It's out. And I'm able to manipulate the baby. And I never did this before. Every baby that I was there to deliver pretty much delivered itself. And then we just hoped that it would breathe. And this baby, the head on the jaw was stuck in the vagina. And I was like, this is bad. And I'm trying to use my training, trying to use two fingers to create an airway in case the baby starts to breathe.
Right.
And my partner's fidgeting, like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And the woman's, screaming on the ground. Her friend is yelling, "Push, push, push." And two cops show up. And the two cops say, "Is there anything that we could do to help?" I said, "We're going to have to move. We can't put her in a chair. We can't walk her. We're going to have to get her on a scoop." And he says, "What do you need me to do?" I said, "We need you to go downstairs and get the scoop. There's a compartment in the back of the ambulance. You open up the doors. It's long silver things with 3 straps on it. Bring that up." So he goes down, and I'm still in the same position. And eventually this lady yelling, "Push, push, push," tells her to push so much that the head burst out. And all the amniotic fluid goes in my face. It's in my eyes. I'm like, "Is it okay? Is everything okay?" And the baby starts screaming, and everybody's happy. And we're getting ready to cut the cord. Things are looking good. And like 10 minutes goes by since the the police officer left, and he comes back and he's actually smoking a cigarette, and he's holding the keys. And back then the keys had a big block on it.
Yeah.
He looks at me and he says, "I couldn't find that thing that you wanted."
Well, thanks.
Yeah. I said, "Well, now we're not going to need it. I
Yeah.
think we'll be able to put her in a chair now."
Situation worked itself out. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Ah, man. So, and you know what? And you're not even a lieutenant yet by this point. You became a medic in 86. You make lieutenant in 90. And tell me, I mean, listen, by that point, you've been battle tested, working in Harlem, working at Bellevue. Now you'd end up, when you got promoted in 1990, working in do or die Bed-Stuy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But just tell me about the desire to even want to be an officer in the first place. Because, I mean, listen, you could be a senior guy and accrue enough experience and knowledge that way. But there are some that want to accrue that experience and knowledge while also moving up in the ranks. So how soon did you start studying?
I take studying real serious. Like, I have a hard time learning things. Like, when I have to do the REMAC recertification every 3 years, which I didn't have to do it this year. I did it online. I study for months and months and months. Like, I'd be in Great Adventure with my kids online, and I'd have my phone going through the REMAC questions, and going over and over and over every moment. And I remember having that operating guide out, big gigantic book. It wasn't a tablet; it was a book, and just going over everything. And I scored okay. I didn't score the greatest. I wasn't the first group out of my. I think I was at like 111 on the list of 300, but 111 is pretty damn deep for a person who actually studied.
Oh, yeah, I'll say.
My best friend, when we were in medic school, Jimmy Nealon, he unbelievably smart. When we were in paramedic school, I would be studying all the time, and I had my apartment, and I'd be up, and I have to go get him, and his mother would be at the door saying, "Jimmy's sleeping. He's sleeping like a log." I'm like, "No, he has school. He has school." And I eventually get him to wake up, and he says, "I'm so hungover." He said, "I just left the bar." I said, "Jim, we have a test today." And I remember I'd be doing the test, and I'd be thinking about Jimmy Nealon. I said, "Poor Jimmy, he's going to be a mess." And I get the test back, and I just pass it like with an 82. And I would say, "Poor Jim." And I go over to Jim, and I said, "Jim, what'd you get?" He goes, 97.
Of course. Of course. I knew as soon as you mentioned he was hungover that it was going to come out with the top score. The law of averages always seems to happen that way.
So the true challenge in my life was paramedic school. Back in we started together in 1985. And, it started with over 60, maybe 70 people. And we ended with 16. And those other people, they were thrown out. You failed 3 quizzes, you were out. And I was always studying my ass off for that. It was like, I found it really hard. And it was such a rewarding time in September of 1986 when we were promoted to paramedic. And I was once again sent to Harlem, but I was only there for 4 months, and I worked, and I got a lot of good experience there as a paramedic that I wouldn't have gotten at Bellevue. But I made it back to Bellevue, and I had gotten a unit, 13 X-ray, Midtown Manhattan. We sat at the Empire State Building. I can't tell you how many bodies we've taken off the ledges off the, that people have jumped on from the top of the World Trade Center. Very rarely, not the Trade Center, the Empire State Building. Very rarely they would ever make it down to the street level because the building tears, down. And they would be blown back into the building sometimes because of the high winds. But they would call it in as a trauma, but it was going to be a DOA. I did that call too many times. Men under trains, people that either jumped in front of trains or got pushed in front of trains. And I can remember those years that actually we climbed down onto the tracks. We were trained, what not to touch, and we were collecting body parts from underneath the trains. And also, sometimes I've had patients that survive being hit by a train. The trauma, I've seen a lot. I do remember working at Bellevue one night, and we went over to the West Side for a call for trauma. And there was a prostitute that really pissed off a client. And he took his car and he rammed her up against a wall, and her lower extremities were smashed to pieces.
Oh my goodness.
And we pulled the car back and we got her up on a board and got her to Bellevue. And I remember she was really pretty. And it was really weird because she actually had a very good blood pressure because her extremities were smashed. That, you know, it wasn't that she was bleeding out, but she was going to lose both of her legs. And there was a blanket over her legs, and the doctor walked over and said, like, so what do we have here? Like almost like flirting with the girl. And then he lifted up the blanket and looked, and he goes, oh my God, I can't believe that. Like, what happened to her? I had to explain to the doctor, but it's something, these things that you remember over and over again, you know, these calls.
And it kind of would serve you well for what will come later as an instructor, not only just being an officer, but also an instructor too. Yeah. Now,
Mike, you would ask a question. I often get sidetracked. So you talked about studying for the lieutenant's exam. Mm-hmm. I studied hard to get that score that only left me 111. But as they were getting closer and closer with the classes to my number, I really loved being a paramedic. And I was a happening paramedic. I was a Bellevue paramedic. I ran the Bellevue parties. We did 2 parties, benefit parties. And the last one that I ran was a Halloween party. There were 700 people there. We didn't even know what the benefits were going to be because we had to plan them ahead of time. And I was in charge of that. And because of that, I knew every cop, every police officer, every nurse. But, you know, funny, back in the 80s, we very rarely saw fire. You know, if we only went to a fire and saw fire. You know, we didn't know the engines. I didn't know the difference between a truck or an engine. You know, it wasn't until after the merge that, you know, that we actually started to see them through the CFRD program. Right. And I was involved with the CFRD program, and it was that they're bringing in these salty dogs into a classroom with 100 people, and they had to have fire marshals standing by, because in the first day they would tell the firefighters, these are the rules. You will come back for lunch. You will take tests. You will learn this medical stuff. And there was always that salty dog that first day that would get up and say, I'm not doing it. and they would have to escort the guy out of the room, and wherever he would go, I don't know, but they took the CFRD program really serious. And I have to look back and say the times that we trained people, we would train 150 people on an apron of a firehouse, and on a rock. 150 people would be in that room. And then that was the Monday group, and they would come every Monday. And then we have the Tuesday group, 150 people, and they would come every Tuesday, and so on and so on. We trained a lot of firefighters in CFRD, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of the new guys now, they don't know better, but the old guys, they didn't like it. It was, they were coming up with some of the things were hysterical. Like we would say, so what oxygen device are you going to put on the patient? And the firefighter would say, the older guy would say, a nasal cannoli. No, it's nasal cannula. But that was a really good experience. But when I was a paramedic, I was having a ball, and we were saving lives, and we had the opportunity to save, I can't repeat their names, but celebrities' lives. One time we saved the life at the Red Blazer 2 restaurant on 46th Street, no longer there. Really great music, like New Orleans music,
jazz.
Yeah, jazz. And we saved this guy's life. And I remember as we were taking him and putting him in the ambulance, his hand came up and he was grabbing the tube. And then I said, when that happens, that's really good. And I remember the wife saying, how could that be good? I said, because most people don't wake up. They don't go to grab the tube. And we took him to St. Clair's Hospital. And that's a closed hospital. It's in Manhattan. And We didn't see him. We had to go back in service, do another call, do another call. A year later, Rob Rosenwald and I are back at the Red Blazer 2, and the manager comes over. We're there for a drunk now. And the manager comes over, aren't you the guys that saved Mr. DeBreeze? And I said, who? Who? And he says, I'm sure it's you guys. And he's here every Friday night. He has his own table that we put him on. He's a diplomat from Holland, and he's here every Friday night. And he said, I would like you and Rob to be our guests with your girlfriends or wives or other. And I'm going to surprise him. And he did. And after that, him and his wife, Leon Tilly, became really good friends. They were at my wedding. They were at christenings. They've had us at parties. And he was an interesting guy. He has since passed, and so has Tilly. But he would invite me to parties with diplomats from all over the world, and he would say, "This man is my doctor." And then kind of like walk away, and then they would say, "So where'd you go to medical school?" I said, "I didn't go to medical school. I'm not a doctor." But it was a great time. The experiences of saving lives. We've had a lot of fun. The people of Bellevue were really great, tight, and we were kind of by ourselves back then. Like if you called for help, you didn't get a fire engine. You got two EMTs or eventually two police officers that would come. Mm-hmm. And the police officers would often just wanting to get off the scene. They would say it's a EMS matter only, 55, and we're standing on the 4th floor with the fat lady on the chair and 5 pieces of equipment and trying to figure out the sorcery of how to get the person down. When you watch Emergency in those EMS shows, they show the people at the scene, and then they go into commercial. And the next scene back is they're now in the ambulance or at the hospital. They don't show the struggling of how to take a person down the stairs. How one New Year's Eve, on a stroke of midnight, we had the person on a Stoke stretcher, which is a flat stretcher that you just cocoon the person. We don't have them anymore. And sliding this lady down the stairs because we were not able to lift her. And I remember on the radio, the dispatcher saying, "Happy New Year, units, Happy New Year." And other units coming back and saying, "Happy New Year." We're on a staircase with that patient. I don't know what year that was. It's probably 1987, something.
And those lift assists are no joke either. That's where those stair chairs, especially now, really are a godsend. I did want to ask you about this. So late 80s, early 90s, we're talking with Division Chief Jay Swithers, formerly of FDNY EMS. This is volume 64, the best, the bravest. Bob Becker had a big impact. Chief Goldfarb and Chief Kerr had big impacts as well, I should say, and really modernizing New York City EMS and kind of bringing it into the 20th century. Nobody knew if a merge was around the corner. That was still pretty far away. But just in terms of establishing operations, establishing the Special Operations Division, a lot of which exists now as HASTAC on the FDNY side post-merger, it was positively impacting the agency. It was starting to really bring the agency out of the dark ages. And you bore the brunt of that in a good way, especially being an officer at that time, being a lieutenant. When you saw that shift, how hopeful did it make you feel about the future of not only the agency, but just EMS in general in a city like New York?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you, when the merge was happening, everybody on the EMS side was calling it a hostile takeover. Nobody on the EMTs and paramedics were not excited about it. I was, in fact, excited about it because I felt as if that this is the opportunity to get better funding, better equipment, engage in a networking with firefighters. They were already launching what was going to be the CFRD program, and right. The engines were coming on our calls. Our EMS folks felt that if you're going to spend all that money for fire, why don't you just hire more EMS people and give us raises so we don't move on? I started in 1984 making $17,400 a year, and that hurt. Although I'm going to say a police officer was only making maybe 22,000, but that's a large percentage between the two. I remember having a police officer girlfriend, and she repeated all the time, you know, the difference between our salaries all the time. It was, you know, back then we wore white shirts and green pants, and we had to go get that stuff. You know, we had to buy it. We got a uniform allowance, but everybody was wearing different shades of green. The white shirts, some people were polished and pressed, and others, they were yellow and wrinkled. The patches looked like they were done over too much with Clorox. It was EMS. We had ambulances that were crappy. I remember ambulances that had like the light in the back was being held, that the light that, you know, that we used in the back with 2 wires with tape, electrical tape on it, and the light bulb just swung back and forth. Our suction units were these things that we would stomp on. They were like you know, you stepped on it and it recoiled and recoiled, and that was how we did suction. We had a traction splint, which is for femur fractures that we put onto the leg, that have cranks now. We just had the wire part, and we had to use all cravats to figure out how to use it. And like, we didn't have defibrillators. We didn't have mask pants, which have come and gone. The paramedics carried Life Pack 5, which is like, did nothing other than, you know, monitor the rhythm. It did cardiac pacing, but it didn't do a whole lot. It was really light though. That was really good. When we merged with fire, I was enthusiastic that this is going to be great. And it was great. But unfortunately for me, I was now an officer, and I love being a paramedic. When I became an officer, it was almost like somebody just took half my life away from me. And I went to lieutenant school, and there was only 8 of us in the class. Chief McCracken, Robert McCracken, was the chief of EMS back then, and I thought the world of Chief McCracken. You know, Chief, you mentioned Chief Kerr and Chief Goldfarb. I think the world of them too. Chief Goldfarb is still making great contributions to the EMS community through his writing and his publication. Yes. And I talked to him, and we sort of adore each other as professionals, because I've done different things and he did different things. But Chief McCracken, I think when the merge happened, they took him away from being chief of EMS, and they made Dan Nigro the chief of EMS. Mm-hmm. And people were a little bit sour about that because of the fact that, you know, what do you know about EMS? But Chief Nigro, after a year, said, you guys know how to do this better than I do. And they gave back the title of chief of EMS to Robert McCracken. And that was a good thing. And the vehicles got better. The equipment got better. It seemed like there was more. We were in uniforms that we went to a uniform store. We looked the same. It was a hard time and exciting time. Now I'm going to tell you one of the biggest challenges of my career was the fire department had issues of diversity, and they were being sued. And one of their solutions were to create a cadet program. And the cadet program would be designed to bring the people into EMS and have them have the option of taking a test and becoming firefighters. Now, the whole point was to bring in as many minorities and females at the same time. So this program, they sent how many black firefighters that they actually existed? There weren't that many, but they found them, and they brought them out to city colleges, and they recruited people, and they made this program. They said to the EMS Academy, can you train 150 cadets to become EMTs? And we were really busy at the time. I was working at the academy. We had no place for anything, no room, short of instructors. And John Clappin, who was in charge of the academy, said, we couldn't do it properly. And he's being honest, because he was a quality instructor, quality educator. And he said, can't do that. So what they did was they they reached out to John Jay College. They had a connection there. One of my mentors who's passed, Jimmy Boyle, was working there. He was the president of the UFA twice in the past.
He had a son on the job that got killed on 9/11,
Yeah,
right?
his son killed on 9/11, and
Yep.
recently another son just died a month ago, which is a little bit sad.
Yeah.
But they asked me to be the person in between. And our people, the EMS people, hated the program because they said it was a stepping stone for people to become firefighters. On the other hand, the firefighters hated it because they said, you're backdooring people. I didn't get an option to take a separate test, that I could have just gotten. I had to get 100 on my physical to even be 100 and 100 on both the written and the physical would be the only way that you become a firefighter. So they had them, and they told me that I was going to be the liaison.
Oh, looks like the chief rose up on us. All righty. Well, we'll put Chief Swithers in the background there while we sort that out. Apologies for that. He was in the middle of a good story, too. We're talking with Division Chief Jay Swithers. This is Volume 64, the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. One thing I do want to get into with Chief Swithers at some point is he did respond to the World Trade Center in 1993. Now, that was, especially when the merge happened in the spring of 1996, which we were talking about before that technological mishap, that was really imperative from the standpoint that naturally in any terrorist incident or mass casualty incident, a huge part of the response is going to be EMS. And I wonder how much of 1993 and that response ended up becoming a blueprint for what would happen later on. And of course, how he would respond in 2001 as a part of FDNY EMS for the World Trade Center Part 2. So we'll talk about that when he would get him back on. In the meantime, maybe shout out to some people here in the chat. Joe Sarieto. Sorry, Joe, you asked me some questions, or you had some questions in the last episode in the chat that I didn't get to, so I feel bad about that. But thanks for tuning in as always, Joe. Good to see you. Don Gonzalez is here. Joe Malik is here. He answered your question earlier about delivering the babies. He covered that before we could even get to it. Pee-wee's here. Steve Iorado. Carlos Rojas via LinkedIn is watching tonight. George Sickler, feel better, buddy. Saw the comment earlier about your knee. Hopefully you recover well. Sergeant Bowen, of course. Now he's Swift. Billy Ryan. And Garrett Lindgren, I mentioned you once. I probably already did, but I'll mention you again. And Kevin Hennessy's here as well. We have Chief Swithers back. We're waiting for him to come back. And Chief, we left off, assuming, and good to have you back, talking about, are you frozen again? Oh, looks like he's frozen again. We'll sort that out with Chief Swithers in a moment. We left off talking about, of course, the response to different emergencies and how the merger impacted operations as well. And why he looked forward to that merger in the spring of 1996. We apologize for the technological difficulties, but we'll work on getting Chief Swithers back up and running soon. Chief, if you can hear us, you might want to click off and just sign on again. Joe, the second book is going well. I see your comment there in the chat. How's the second book going? Transcribing stories actively as I go. In the meantime, while we wait for Chief Swithers to come back, well, let's I don't mean to put you on the spot there, Producer Vick, but we'll bring you on the stage. The audience needs to see you as well. How's everything going with you, my friend?
Pretty good, guys. Pretty good.
Very good. All right. Well, of course, I want to highlight Producer Victor, despite the fact that we wish we weren't having technological difficulties, because this is a great reason as to why the show runs as smoothly as it does. Producer Victor on the ones and twos, taking a big load off me. And really, after many, many years of me having to do everything at once, it's nice to have someone like him making sure that the production aspect is handled so I could just focus on the conversation. So we got the Chief back. But a quick
Thank you, good sir. Yeah, I'll go back to my corner.
All right. Thank you very much. And we'll continue with Chief Swithers right now. Chief, welcome back to the program. Hopefully our technological difficulties are solved. Looks like your internet is giving you some fits. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, now we got you back. You were talking about how much you loved the merger and you were excited for it, even though you were an officer at the time, because it was going to be great going forward for EMS. McCracken comes back as chief after Nigro had it from 96 to 97, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, well, I was just talking about the cadet program, and the cadet program was a major challenge. It was not liked by both the EMS people because it was a stepping stone. And the fire people felt that there shouldn't be a backdoor, easy way to get into the fire, and that having it easier could be jeopardizing people's lives. And I worked that program, and it was a challenge. But the dear person that I got me through that was Jimmy Boyle. Jimmy Boyle was my mentor. He taught me how to help people. He was the president of the UFA twice, 2 different occasions. He did a lot of things for fire. And in my career, I never met a man like him. And he was the guy that got me through there. Like I would go to John Jay an hour early to go to work, and he would go to church every morning, and I would go to church with him whenever I could. And we had those students, and it was rough. When they graduated from John Jay, I brought them over to the academy. There were instructors that were like angry, because they were starting. There was a day group and a night group, and I forgot to tell them not to say that you want to become a firefighter. The first day of the class, they got the first person up and say, "Why are you here?" And the person said, "I really want to become a firefighter." The second person said, "I want to use this as a stepping stone to become a firefighter." The third person said the same thing. And by the 10th person, one of the instructors got up and said, "You're not using my job as a stepping stone." And it was, to me, I was very saddened by the fact that my work, it wasn't appreciated by.
We're having more technical difficulties. I think we are. Well, we lost Chief Swithers again. It's unfortunate because he's got a lot of great stories. We weren't having these problems during the first 50 minutes or so of the program, but we adjust on the fly. Sometimes it's the nature of the guest's internet. Sometimes it's us. I don't think it's us. My internet's fine. Producer Victor's internet's fine. But it appears that Chief Swithers is having problems with that. Now, you could probably just log in via his phone, and maybe that would solve the problem so we could keep hearing his stories. I definitely want to get into the Trade Center responses with him. So we'll wait until we sort that out. But again, thank you to everybody for tuning in, and we apologize for these difficulties that we're having right now with our guest. We'll wait for him to come back on momentarily. A quick editor's note as far as what's coming up next on the Mike New Haven podcast. It will be John Fleming. He was a detective in New York City's Office of Special Narcotics. So we're going to get a good spotlight. It'll be a bit of a different show on a law enforcement agency that not many in the city know about. So that'll be John Fleming. He'll be here this Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be on the lookout for that show. We have the chief back again. Hopefully this is the last of our technological problems because we don't want to be robbed of the stories. And Chief, go proceed with what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, the great part about that program is that my relationship with Jimmy Boyle became really great. He became my mentor. He did more favors for people and asked for more favors. When he died, what's his name? King, Senator King.
Peter? No, not Peter.
Peter King.
Was it Peter King? Yeah, Peter King.
He was at the funeral next to Giuliani, and I was with the family. And Peter King actually got up and said, "I never had a man ask me for so many favors, but none of them were for him." And I still stay in contact with his family. I'm a mentor to his granddaughter. She is a paramedic in Philadelphia. Amanda Lynch, a really good friend of mine now, and I love his family. And I feel bad, and I condolences them for their brother and Uncle Peter, who just died recently.
I did want to ask you about this because this was pre-merger, but it would set the groundwork for what would come later and responding later on. 93, first attack on the Trade Center. That day, of course, EMS was there assisting along with PD, FD, NYPD. I don't just mean the NYPD, the Port Authority Police as well, with evacuations, because you essentially had 2 smoke chimneys at that time when that bomb went off. And it's not just the 6 people who were killed in this attack. It's the thousands who were injured primarily because of smoke inhalation. So that day, I know you were involved. What was the exact nature of your involvement with World Trade Center Part 1?
Okay, Mike, that day I wasn't there that day. I was in operations. Mm-hmm. And in operations, my primary role was to try to keep people at work so we could roll them out, whatever tool we were going to use. don't let them go home. It's tour changes. And I didn't have the opportunity to go to the Trade Center on that day. But during that time, that was the first year that they created the Urban Search and Rescue Team, and we were in training. And for the weeks after, I would be there with one other paramedic in an ambulance. And every time they had found a patient in a parking garage, which was like, levels, one of us would have to go down and find one of those 7 people. I actually went down a couple different times, but I still didn't have the opportunity to go down and pronounce any of the bodies. Shout out to Steve Canarian, who was the person who actually, a paramedic lieutenant, retired. Great man. I was working with him, and he pronounced the last person at the World Trade Center weeks later.
Yeah, that was Ricardo Mercado, who was found under piles of debris. He was a worker down there. I think he was making a drop-off when that bomb exploded. We'll go back to the merger in 1996. We covered that. Of course, that was a directive of Commissioner Safer right before he left to go be the NYPD commissioner. And then, of course, Von Essen came in right after that. 1997 into 1998, we talked about the growing pains in terms of getting used to the FDNY and their way of doing things. There was also a lot of training for what would come in the future as it pertains to terrorism. But in the midst of that, there's another personal milestone for you, and where 2000, you end up getting promoted to captain. So this is 16 years involved in New York City EMS / the FDNY. And I imagine that having been a lieutenant for as long as you had been, the transition to captain wasn't that hard, or was it?
It wasn't that hard. I had a unique circumstance. I got moved into an administrative role that should have been a captain or a chief's position that was offered to me as an administrator earlier, and I didn't take it because there was no raise. And I knew that job. I was having to do it with the Bureau of Health Services, workers' compensation, the line of duty injury stuff, and it was just growing at that time. And they approached me and they said, "What do you want to come in here?" And I said, "Nothing. I'll come in there as a lieutenant, coming from the academy, and I will make something of it." And in a short period of time, I got promoted to the captain role. So I didn't have the opportunity other than, just being promoted, but only promoted to the role, the rank that role was supposed to have, that I was already doing. And in my career, which is very much different than most careers, I had the opportunity to work on making authorizations for treatment for EMS people who were injured on line of duty better. I did worked with the annual medicals. And as things came up, like the Trade Center, working with the benefits, because the benefits were being created by the federal government, and we had to interpret what the rules were, and then roll it out. Then people were not getting 3/4. We only got 3/4. I think 1997. Excuse
That's
me.
late in the ballgame.
Yeah, the 3/4 disability benefits.
Mhm.
EMS did not have that. And we had to roll that out. And that rollout was very difficult because of the fact that we were dealing with another agency, NYCERS, New York City Retirement System. And they were denying our EMS people for reasons of which that the incident was not exactly an accident, and it had to be an accident. And we had to look back at the legislation that came from that, and I was the guy that was doing all that work. I took something that was not real and made it into something that had worked for our EMS folks. And in that position, I took on more roles. I was still part of the Urban Search and Rescue team. And then I became part of the incident management team in the finance area, working as a comp claims unit leader. And I was promoted to deputy chief. And then years later, I think 9 years later, I forget how many years it was, I was promoted to division chief. And then I actually had on-call duties at that point. But my career, a lot of it, even though I have a passion for the EMS operations, I work in the field as a paramedic. I feel the pains of like what the people's complaints are, because when they're being told log on, go to your area, go to the hospital, get out of the hospital, go available. A lot of these it's easy to forget those rules, but when you're actually working as a paramedic, you understand the pains of the people, and when you're actually in the field, people would say there's a lot of injuries, too many injuries, but when you're a paramedic or an EMT and you're lifting people that are 2 or 3 times your weight, driving ambulances through red lights, stop signs, it's a rough job, and people get hurt, and I wanted to make sure, I wanted to make a difference and help these people. And I did a really great job of doing that. I'm proud of myself.
Oh, you should be. You should be, especially considering the fact that, again, and I love that you mentioned this, you've been there. You know what it's like. So people who are out in the field appreciate that, because sometimes the further removed the boss can be from the field,
Exactly.
they forget what being in the field is like, but you never forgot that, which is imperative, especially if there's ills that they complain about. You know what they're talking about, and you can act quicker to make the situation tenable, make the situation better. And that not only helps in the short term with morale, but in the long term as well, in terms of networking and trust. The key in any agency, especially an agency as pivotal as yours, is trust. If the guys and gals that are working the street don't trust those who's above them, you're not going to get anything done.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the benefits that EMS got through legislation, it was kind of like thrown at us. And a lot of people would turn around and say, well, EMS is not entitled to that, or that title is not entitled to that. And I kind of feel like the most important people are the line people, our soldiers that are on the road and treating patients. They're the front line, and they're number one. Their pay needs to be raised. Respect, they need to be better respect, better benefits. I'm proud of where we've gotten, but there's so much more. I always said there's nothing greater than the heart of a volunteer. But in the municipality lineup, I would say the hardest working people that get the least respect is probably our FDNY EMS folks.
It's been that way for a long time now.
Yeah.
And EMTs across the board, really, but especially in New York City, I'm like, man, they are getting paid peanuts. It's amazing. The merger happened, and this was before the merger. The merger happened in 1996. That merger will turn 30 years old in a couple of years, Chief, and we're still having the same problem. Still. And and you were, it's not that long ago that you retired. You've only been retired almost 3 years now. You left in 2022. From your vantage point, how does that exactly get fixed? It's easy to say, well, union contract negotiation, but sometimes it goes way beyond that.
Yeah. Well, the unions, they're the backbone. They're the ones that have to get out there. Mm-hmm. And there's advocates that are out there that are very strong. Gary Smiley, who's a retired paramedic.
Yep, I know Gary.
He's done so much. He chases these politicians, and and he was there. He was a rescue medic. He's done a lot. We have to latch on to people. I know when the merge happened, I'm going to tell you a little story that when the merge happened, Jimmy Boyle told me that he approached the union leaders for 2507 and said, I know how to help you. I could help you. And they said, no, we got it. It's all, we're good. We're good. And I kind of like, that was a man that had ideas and he had connections. You can't brush off. It is a little bit unfortunate that the union leadership is great, but they come from being an EMT and a paramedic to a leader, and every time they vote in a new person, it's like a new start.
Right. It's starting from ground level all over again, essentially.
It's a little bit rough. When I was hanging out with Jimmy Boyle, and Michael Boyle, who died at the Trade Center, came up to work light duty with me, and he was a great guy. Michael, uh, you know, I was watching him, and he was campaigning uh, for for leaders, you know, for mayors. Sal Albanese, he was campaigning for Sal Albanese at the time, and I said, Mike, you know, what's going on with you? Your father was one of the greatest union leaders of all time. He said, well, he didn't say it. Somebody else said it. His best friend said it. He's being groomed. He is being groomed to be one of the greatest union leaders ever. And I have to say, on the fire side, they plan ahead, way ahead. The leadership is groomed. Now, things have gotten better for EMS. You know, we have better training. We have FOMI school, fire officer management school for our officers that they could participate with what may have only been something that was given to the firefighters or the fire chiefs. We attend that as well now. We have leadership that looks. Laura Kavanaugh, she was great. She was always said EMS is just as important as fire. But you got to see it in pay. You got to see it in respect. You got to see it in benefits. We've come a long way, but there's so much more to do.
Right. It's a decades-long battle. It's not just happening in New York City, but really across the board. If you look around the country with AMR or different ambulance corps, you could say a lot. And even just ambulance corps within the 5 boroughs, it's something that you could definitely say a lot about, and not most of it pleasant, unfortunately.
And Mike, I want to do a shout out to all the voluntary ambulance people that work in the 9/11 system. You know, nearly 1/3 of the system is made up with people that work for voluntary hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And I often get approached by people with a crisis, and I said, you should have worked for the fire department. Your pay would not have been great, but the benefits that we do have, low line of duty injury up to 18 months, the COVID pay. If you got sick with COVID, you could get that. The 3/4 disability benefits and the heart bill. These are great bills, but I watch people get sick, injured, and lose their jobs working for a voluntary hospital. There is horrible disability pensions, things in place for them. And I would like to see them get on board with get their unions getting to improve their pay and what they get, because I don't think unless you give EMS people a lot of money in another 10 years, we are dependent on these voluntary hospital people to work alongside us. And we're brothers and sisters on the same mission. And, shout out to them. And I hope that they get much better benefits as well.
Absolutely. I did want to highlight this comment from Chris Ebden. He's been on the show before. And he says, if we could highlight that, producer Victor. Chris Ebden, of course, a former member of New York City EMS. He's out in Pasadena, Texas these days. I was on a TPU out of 37 in Bed-Stuy and definitely was around the chief off and on throughout my time there, including MCIs with the OG hashtag bus. All the best to him. So
nice.
And John Fleming, who's popping up as LinkedIn user, but I checked, and that's John, who'll be on the show this Friday. To your point about Boyle, he says, I met Jimmy Boyle when he became the director of labor relations for Joe Hines and the Brooklyn DA's office. I owe him everything for helping me understand how to be a union president. So, yeah, Jimmy Boyle, definitely a man who understands and understood leadership during his time.
Yeah. I just want to tell a little Jimmy Boyle story.
Go right
Jimmy
ahead.
Boyle was working at the DA's office almost right across the street from headquarters. And I was born on September 11th, 1961. So my wife planned a surprise party the Saturday before, and she invited Jimmy. And Jimmy did come to a lot of my events, but for whatever reason, he didn't get around to responding. And she mentioned it to me that, Jimmy Boyle didn't respond. And the next thing I know is I'm at the Trade Center in the afternoon, and I'm standing, on West Street and Chambers, and who shows up? And it's Jimmy. And the first thing that Jimmy actually says to me is, happy birthday. And I'd forgotten it was my birthday. And I said, thank you, Jim. And then the next line out of his mouth was that they can't find Michael. And I was looking at him with my eyes looking over his shoulders with the flames and sparks and smoke, with no Trade Center. And I kind of just said, we're going to find him. But unfortunately, Michael and his best friend, RC, they perished, and they were friends. And, it was a sad time, because you lost a friend, and one of your friend's father, your friend's son, had died, and it was funeral after funeral. It's just overwhelming. It was a very sad time.
I did want to ask. I guess now we can touch on that day. Again, EMS was a big part of the response that day. So much so that in the end of the 343 casualties on the FDNY side, 2 of them were paramedics, Ricardo, Quinn, and Carlos Lillo. Just tell me about step by step your September 11th, 2001. I'll give the floor to you, Chief.
Okay. Well, Ricardo Quinn was actually working Lodi light duty in Queens, and he self-dispatched himself. So he went there on his own from his assignment. But where I was working, I was at headquarters, but I was part of at the time, urban search and rescue team with equipment and bunker gear and whatnot. And it was understood when I took that assignment that I could run out of the building to go to any type of disaster. And they agreed to that. I was putting my gear together after the first plane hit, thinking that it was a much smaller incident. And then somebody came to me and said, the second building was just hit. And at that point I said, wow, this is bigger than what I thought. Everybody had already left the headquarters. There was no more vehicles to go in because I had to change my clothes and had to get my gear together. So I ran down to the Brooklyn Bridge with bunker gear and over my shoulder. And a police officer stopped me and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to the Trade Center." She goes, "Not, what are you doing running to the Trade Center?" And she flagged down a car, police car, unmarked, Crown Vick, lights in front grill. And he stopped and he let me in and then he took off. And I thought I was going to die just from the speed that he was going over the Brooklyn Bridge, and he asked me, "What are you?" And I said I was a paramedic. And as we came down onto Chambers Street, there were crowds of people that were running out away from Manhattan, and they were in the street. And he was actually on the PA yelling, "Get out of the way! I have a paramedic on board." And I'm like a little bit like I'm one paramedic. Dude, don't make too much of me, please. But he dropped me off at the Millennium Hotel. And at that point, I knew that I had to find the sock guys. And these were the people I've gone to the Dominican Republic with to a Hurricane George back in 1989. And I know Chief Downey, and he's a tough guy. He was tough. And
Military man.
Yeah. Oh, I was afraid of him. So I was like, I need to find Chief Downey. And the EMS people were like, "Who?" I said, "The sock guys. I need the sock guys." And they're like, "Sock? What's sock?" And I was like, "Special Operation Command." And then I looked over and they were struggling because lots of patients were just coming across the street. They moved the triage to right in front of the Millennium Hotel. There's planters there. And people were sitting on the planters. And they were doing hanging triage tags on people, and people were in distress. Carlos Lillo was actually there on that corner. There's a picture of him with a patient in a red dress sitting on a stair chair. She's burned, and he's like directing somebody to do something. And I remember that scene, and I didn't know where the sock people were, but I said, this is going to be a long operation. I could help triage. So I went over and there was a woman there. She was crying. She was a heavy-set black woman in a business outfit. She was sitting on the planter, and I walked over and I said, "Are you okay?" And we were doing triage. And she said, "I can't breathe. I have asthma." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to make you a red tag, but I'm also going to give you some oxygen." And I went to grab the oxygen. And as I grabbed the oxygen, the South Tower started to crumble. But from my point, looking up, I didn't see it crumbling down. I thought it was like more blasting out because what was coming down was just going down, caking step floor by floor by floor. And I don't know what to do with the lady. And I looked down at her and she was gone. She ran away. So that was like Well, that's a relief. I don't have a patient, but at that point, I took cover on just laying on the ground, and the ground was just the debris was just coming up around me and on top of me, and I couldn't breathe. And I had my helmet on my head, and I had the visor, and I was pulling it down, pulling it up, my mouth full of dirt. I couldn't breathe. I said, I'm going to die. And I remember thinking about my wife, my family. And at one moment, I actually said, I only have $150,000 worth of life insurance. I gotta survive this. My wife won't be able to make it on that. And somehow, in the minutes, I felt somebody grab my helmet and say, "We got a firefighter here. He's going to get us out." And I was thinking to myself, "Get you out? Who's going to get me out?" And I didn't know what to say. The air cleared enough to blow out my mouth, and I said, "Okay, we need to know how many people we are." And I thought there was 4. So I said, let's count out loud. One person said 1, another person said 2, another person said 3. And I was about to say 4 and make it a day, 4 people. But that counting kept going. There were like 9 people there. And I said, God, like 7 or 9 people that counted. And I said, I don't even know what to tell you. I can't, everything was black, couldn't see. The air was thick. People were injured. They were bleeding. And we managed to go up the street to Broadway. And I remember people crawling out from underneath cars. There was a lady in the subway. I went down and she was in a fetal position crying. And I didn't know what to tell her. Then an ambulance pulled up and the ambulance was clean. And 2 EMTs, I didn't recognize them, came out and everybody ran towards the ambulance. It was like they're going, like lots of people. And there was an unconscious man in a wheelbarrow. And they wheeled him over and they threw him onto the stretcher. They pulled the stretcher out. They threw him on the stretcher. But the other people were climbing in the ambulance, wanted to get out. And I was just kind of like standing there, like amazed, like how many people can you put in the back of an ambulance? And I felt somebody tugging on my pants. And I looked down and it was a woman in the business outfit, just covered with debris. The same woman that that ran away having the asthma attack. And I said, well, for sure, you're going to get in. And I said, but I can't lift you. So I said, you're going to have to kneel on that back bumper, that step. And then I said, okay, now get your knee up to the platform. And she got her knee up to the platform. And the people, some of them were actually saying she's too big. She's not going to fit. And I said, no, she's going to fit. And I was actually pushing her, like pushing her buttocks in until she collapsed. And I heard somebody say, she's on my arm. She's on my arm. And I was able to grab a leg, close one door, and then grab the other leg and push it in and close the other door. And I gave the thumbs up to the driver, go. And there actually was a set of keys on the back door. Still, the other partner never took his keys off the back door. On the back door was the keys for the ambulance that was flipping in the wind. I think that's the closest I came to saving a life. The days to come, the hours to come. I came back. Somebody had told me we were at the ferry terminal at one point doing triage, and no patients were coming out. No patients were coming out, and a ferry came in from Staten Island filled with firefighters, and there were people applauding for the firefighters that they were there. And the firefighters, and I talked to them, and they were writing their names and their social security numbers on their arms. So should anything happen to them, that they would be able to be identified. That's, we actually thought we were going to die because we didn't know what was going to happen next. We got the word that the Pentagon got hit. Somebody said the Empire State Building is going to get hit. There's going to be that there secondary devices. But we went back, and I remember going back to Chambers Street at BMCC, and our equipment was coming in on trucks, the USAR equipment. We were setting up tents, setting up to do whatever we were going to do. And I remember we were blocks away from Building 7, and Building 7 started to crumble, and the debris started to fly towards us. And I yelled, run, run. And people started to run up the ramp at the Borough Manhattan Community College. And it was obvious that the debris wasn't going to get to us. So we stopped. we turned around and we retreated. And it was a fire chief that turned around to me and said, "I give the order to run." And I looked at it, muttered underneath my breath, like, after you've been in 2 collapses a day, you know when to run. You don't hang out. It would have been a much better scene as I look back on some of those videos of people running down the street, that if I would have ran down the street rather than laying on the ground, I wouldn't have been hit so hard, with debris, and my mouth wouldn't have been filled with the dirt. There were days that we would find, the first day, I remember we found a guy in what appeared to be bunker gear, and his abdomen was open. He was dead, and the firefighter was standing on a platform of a vehicle, and he was pulling what he thought was a rope. And I looked up at him and I said, "It's small intestines." And he said, "What?" And I said, "You're pulling the small intestines." And he said, "How do you know?" And I said, 23 feet, 23 feet, small intestines. And I was shocked that I even said that. That first day was, you find a head. One point, 5 paramedics were together. Anthony DeGennaro was one of them, and a few others. I just can't remember their names. And we didn't have a plan. And we sat down on the curb and we said, we're going to have to find a group of people to work with, because there were a lot of people there, but initially it was hard to figure out what the mission was going to be. It was hard to figure out who was leading, who was doing what was happening, and equipment was coming in. And I remember we were talking and we said, okay, should we split up and help different groups, or should we work together? We need to figure out what our goal, what our mission would be for today. And of course, an incident management team is always planning for the next incident day, for the next for the next operational period. We're already in that period, and we don't have a plan. And we were sitting on that on the curb, in kind of like a little bit of a circle. And one of the female members of the team points down on the ground, and in the puddle is a hand. And the hand has a diamond ring on it. And I remember being so touched, because you say that person was loved, and now that person's dead. And not only is she dead, it's just a hand. There's no body there. There were people that were shredded. And those days were rough, because every day it became harder. The smell was horrible. We weren't finding anybody. But in that one day, and I have to say, I didn't save a life, but I was with call Traumatana, and somebody said, we have a live person. And this was actually the last person that was pulled out alive on September 12th. It wasn't the 2 Port Authority officers.
No, this was a woman. Paulie Soman from Rescue 2 was among those that helped pull her out. I know you're talking about.
They said we need paramedics, and Call and I were jumping from one stable place to another to get to this one place, and they had ladders tied together up to like part of a building that wasn't completely down, and they said, she's up there. And I looked at a Call and I said, I don't know if I could climb up those ladders with equipment. And they were kind of like roped together. They're like, no, we're going to lower her down on a Stoke stretcher. But first, we're going to lower a dead guy down, because we have to free her or something. And they lowered they lowered the Stoke stretcher down. And as it came, they daisy trained the Stoke stretcher through to get her to the American Express building, to get whoever it was. And as she passed me, she was naked. Her head was swollen. I noticed her lips a little bit wet. And I said, that's the dead person? And within minutes, when the Stoke stretcher made it to the American Express building, one of our lieutenants, EMS lieutenants, Jerry Santiago, came over the radio and said, call this one's alive. And she was actually alive, and she was the last person pulled out. And she was that close to being put into a body bag because she looked like she was dead. And
Right.
unfortunately, the other person actually was dead. So they just
Right.
sent down the person who was alive before they sent down the dead person because I guess they freed her up. But was the last person to survive, and in a way, I'm proud of Colón and I for being there, but we didn't get to do anything for her.
And this was 20, like I said, 27 hours after the fact. So this was the next day. And then, as you said, after that, there was just recoveries from that point forward. It was no longer a rescue mission. Thanks for sharing that. There comes the transition to chief a little bit later on, I believe, in 2003 in the finance section. So you had already been in logistics as it was, given the fact that you had an administrative position that continued with your rise to captain. It continued even more so with your rise to chief. You saw a continued evolution all the way up until 2022. So as far as managing incidents both nationwide in your involvement with logistics, especially as you mentioned you saw earlier, and the New York City level post 9/11, just tell me about your chief's years up until you called it a day a couple of years ago on the FDNY side.
Well, I was very much involved with the USAR team, but when I got promoted to chief, they really don't want chiefs to be in the weeds. They want them to be leaders. That's where you're supposed to stand up and let the other people do the work, and kind of make recommendations and lead. So the next step was through the World Trade Center, how the story of getting more organized was that we had chiefs there, but this was a large-scale incident that was going to last months. And the firefighters are great. Fire chiefs are great. But traditionally in New York, a fire goes on a building, the firefighters go there, they pull people out, they save lives, they put the fire out, and then they go back to the house and go to the next one. This was going to be an event that was going to be very similar to how they would have to fight a wildland fire that would go on for months and months and months, or months or longer.
It's timely now.
Multiple operational periods.
Yeah.
So the federal government sent in wildland incident management teams. They were experts in wildland fires. And I was told that the fire chiefs were like looking at these guys from out west, their big belt buckle, their cowboy hats, and saying, "You got to be kidding." And they said, "We're here to help." And they offered their help. And the fire chiefs at the time said, "I think we got it. I think we know what we're doing." And within 2 days, they realized, what do you guys have for us? Can you help us with? And they taught them about working for the next operational period. We have a planning P that we take the incident today and we're going to plan what the operational plan will be for tomorrow. What are the resources that we're going to need? What sections are we going to have? What ambulances are needed? And you will do this every day, have a meeting every day where you're starting to plan for the next operational period. So we got control over the incident through the help of the Southwest Incident Management Team in Arizona. And we actually became friends with them. And we insisted that we needed to learn what they do. And these incident management teams, there's different sizes. Level 1, level 2, level 3, one being like a 66-person team. It's a mirror of the next team. So the team could last 2 weeks on a site and they could hand it off to the next team without having much of a transition, because everybody has the same position. Your counterpart would meet up with you and you would hand over the incident. So this incident management team concept was becoming big. We were sending people out to wildland fires to be trained in, first, watching, and then doing it on your own and getting certified. And there was a position on that team that was hard to fill. It's still hard to fill. Within the finance section, the different sections, you have the operations, logistics, planning, and finance section. there's a position called the Comp Claims Unit Leader. And the Comp Claims Unit Leader looked after the injured people that were working on the incident and how to take care of them. And that was exactly what I was doing at the fire department. So they automatically made me the Comp Claims Unit Leader. And through that, I had the opportunity in my career to go out to numerous wildland fires. Sometimes I was sent out on my own to work with other teams. Sometimes I was sent out with just a few individuals. And sometimes, like in Idaho, our entire team went to Idaho to a wildland fire. And, people would say, what do these guys know about wildland fires? But they learned a lot, and we learned a lot. And that incident management team, I became the finance section chief. Being the finance section chief, you either become a person that people like a lot, or people don't like a lot because you'd say that's too expensive. The design of the concept is to not allow the incident's costs go spiraling out of control. That you don't have resources that you don't need, and you have the resources that you do need, and you call up what resources that you need for next week, so you have them in place for the next operational period. In my career, that was one of the greater opportunities to become the finance section chief and work alongside really great fire chiefs and work as a team. You can't spell team with an I.
Right. No, that's true.
Excuse me. What is it? No, you could spell
There's no I
team
in
with a
team.
me. You don't. Right. You got it. I'm sorry.
Listen, but no, the point was well taken, and the point was understood, because that's true. Especially now, asset management in the emergency the emergency response field is everything. If you don't know how to manage assets, you're already screwed from the start with the operation. And it's funny you mentioned wildland fires, because these days, the brush fire unit and the FDNY is getting a lot of work. There's been brush fires in Manhattan of all places, in Brooklyn of all places. There's one in Staten Island the other day, an unprecedented drive period to where places that you wouldn't think would have experience with these type of things are actually gaining invaluable experience and multiple alarms worth of experience at that.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing thing.
Everything in the FDNY is so exciting. The initiatives. I was working at volunteer ambulance one night a few weeks ago, and there was an incident that unfortunately somebody had hit a bicyclist. And I go to the hospital with a patient, and I see all the SUVs, the big chiefs are all there. And I said, uh-oh, something happened. And the person involved in the incident, the driver, the EMS guy, was upset. And I go inside the ER, and there's a dog with the firefighter. And I said, oh, it's an arson dog. What is it doing here? He goes, no, this dog works for family assistance. This is like a dog that coddles people that needs, if there's a firefighter that saw something horrible, or an EMS person, we bring this dog out. And it was amazing that the dog walked up to the guy, and the guy's head was down and his head was up, and he was petting the dog. And the dog handler said, he's doing his job.
Yep.
The initiatives, when we would do drills with the IMT, and drones, we never saw drones, and then we had them. They're amazing. For a fire to be able to bring eyes up above a fire without having to have a helicopter, it's a great tool.
Absolutely. Especially now with the drones being available, particularly with building collapses. I remember there was a building collapse a while ago where a drone was surveying specific spots to know where to send members, I should say, in, and where not to send them in. So the technology that's available now and across the board, not just on the firefighting side, but the EMS side, is amazing.
And the training, it's unbelievable. The active shooter training that they created, and they practice it. It's amazing how lives will be saved if there was ever active shooter in New York, because they would get guys in there and put tourniquets on, and then triage the patients, and then get another team to pull the red tag people out, in a safe manner, working with ESU. And we trained at facilities upstate where ESU would actually be doing the hero work of trying to take down the shooter. But also the next step is we need to get our people out, our citizens out. And they would go in as a train with ESU in the front and the EMS people in the middle and ESU people in the back, and go through the building. And they would drill and do this over and over and over again. And everybody would learn it, and how to, pulling the skids out. The FDNY is amazing training, opportunities for people to learn. And through it, people are saving lives and contributing to, our great city.
Mm-hmm. It's a department that's constantly evolving, which you can appreciate. I mean, it's always 10 steps ahead, and you need to, because the city's always changing. It doesn't matter if the direction's going good or bad. It's imperative that the emergency response agencies like the FDNY, like the NYPD or the Port Authority Police stay ahead of the curve, which they've, for the most part, particularly with the fire department, they've always done a good job, especially in post 9/11 world, of making sure they're ahead. Got one more question for you before we get to the rapid fire segment to conclude, and that is 2022 stepping away. Now, you're not done yet. You're still going strong and you're still working, but the FDNY component and EMS component, at least in that specific capacity, has since stopped. So in 2022, by then a division chief, you've risen pretty high in those almost 40 years between NYC EMS and the FDNY. What was it that made you say, or was it a series of things that made you say it's time to go?
Well, I did 38 years, and I think that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
When we got the 25 and out, I always was saying on my 25th year, I'm going to leave. And it got to the point where I was going to leave, and at one of those thresholds, people said, "What are we going to do without him?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going any. I am thrilled to have gotten to the point where I was a deputy chief." And I kind of was told, well, it was actually Jimmy Boyle that wrote a letter to the commissioner saying that if you lose this man, you're losing a vital part of the fire department.
It's a heck of an
And
endorsement.
the commissioner had to validate that. And he had Liz Cassio at the time called me, and she said that the commissioner got a letter from Jimmy Boyle. And is any of this true? I said, I do a lot of things behind the scenes to help our members, and I'm leaving because I'm there 33 years. It's time. And she said, well, what if the city was to promote you? And I said, well, that ain't going to happen. And she said, why do you think it's not going to happen? And I said, I used to think the world of Commissioner Rush. He was the finance, he was the commissioner of finance for the fire department, and he had mentioned it. And he said it wasn't going to happen. And when another chief said you should promote him at the end of a meeting. And then she went back and she asked Commissioner Rush, and Commissioner Rush said, why would I ever say that? I think the world of this guy. I want to promote him. I do want to promote him. And then he called me and he was angry. And he said, why did you tell the commissioners, XO, that I didn't want to promote? Because you said it. And he goes, well, it wasn't me. It was because somebody else, it did come up earlier, but somebody else didn't want you to be promoted. And unfortunately, you have friends and then you have foes, and sometimes you learn who your friends are. Mm-hmm. And the deal was, he said, they're very serious about this. They're going to bring it to the office of OMB, the mayor budget people. And I got promoted, and I had to promise that I was going to be there for 5 years. It was that's what I was going to do. And I took on more responsibility, but I kind of felt that the toll of having so many widows that I've helped. And it's always been, I had to go against the grain for my whole career to do what was right. The cadet program. And the cadet program was a success, because often I stand online at a funeral and a guy next to me would say to me, aren't you Lieutenant Swithers? I said, no, I'm Chief Swithers. And he goes, I'm Chief Murphy. I was like, "Oh, Chief Murphy, how are you? Nice to meet you." He goes, "I was in the cadet program." So to
Now look at him
see
now.
the next leaders of that program, looking forward and saying, if I had failed in that program, that guy may have not stayed in the fire department, and he would not be one of the high-ranking chiefs. It was a thrill to see that, and even the ones that didn't become officers but saved so many lives and became paramedics. I'm so thrilled when they come up to me in the field. I have a hard time remembering people, but they look older after so many years.
Right.
And they would come to me and say, "You were my instructor during the cadet program, and I know what you went through, and I respect that." That was, but getting back to the part of like, I was fighting with these agencies, NYCERS, the New York City Law Department Workers' Compensation Division, trying to get authorization for treatment, trying to get three-quarter disability benefits for people, trying to get the widows from World Trade Center and widows from heart problems benefits, getting their death benefits. It was always difficult. As a result, I have probably about 20 or 30 people, some of them watching right now, widows that are, I can't believe I get Christmas, text messages, birthday text messages, and they're still my friends. I've done street namings, and they're sometimes embarrassing because they come up to me and they give me these big gigantic hugs in front of my kids. Like, who's that? But I
wonderful honor and a wonderful distinction.
If I was to stay, I don't know if I would still be alive. I'd probably have a heart attack. But they're still calling me. There's folks, EMTs, that are in distress, and I'm the guy that still knows a lot of these procedures, the policies, the politics. I know the people that run the show at NYCERS, and I know the friends and the foes, and I do it for free, and I love every moment of it.
Well, thank you for all that you've done and you continue to do. And this was a great inside look at not only, of course, the EMS component of the FDNY, but also the logistics management and the administrative management that has to go on behind the scenes to keep the operation running smoothly. So I very much appreciate your time. We have the rapid fire segment, and this is where the guest has to go quick. It's 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from them on the spot. I'm going to change it up a bit because a lot of the questions that I had here, you've already done a great job of answering. So the first one is most uplifting call you would say you've ever responded to, besides, of course, delivering babies. That's uplifting in and of itself. Besides that.
Yeah, well, I shared that call that happened at the Red Blazer 2, where it wasn't about just resuscitating a person, because in that time frame, it was a big deal to resuscitate a person because the save rate was probably 2%. Yeah, so we only saw maybe 1 or 2 out of 100 people to come back. But and then sometimes you would bring them back and they were already down 4 to 6 minutes or greater, and they're brain dead and they have issues. Scratch your head. It's hard to digest to say we brought a person back to be on a ventilator for the rest of their life. That's rough. But that one particular call with Mr. DeVries, and then being able to meet him later and see the things that he did later, it's pretty great. It's pretty great. It's a shame that we're not allowed to mention names of celebrities, but it's pretty cool when a celebrity would come up on a radio show and mention that he was resuscitated by an EMS crew. I like that a lot. There was one incident that I don't know if the outcome was for the best at all, but when I met my wife, I told her that she needed to become an EMT. So she joined Bravo Volunteer Ambulance and she took an EMT class. Mm-hmm. And I said, we ride together. And it was neat having her with me. And I was very proud of her because she was able to do things. And her best friend was actually a paramedic who introduced us. And, she never got into it, but there was a day I was working Bravo volunteer ambulance with my wife, and there was another guy, Adam Gottlieb, who's a big EMS person at New York Hospital now. We were working, and we hear over the PD radio that a car went off the pier in Sunset Park. There's piers that go out into the into the bay, and a van drove off the pier. The story was that a man was teaching driving lessons to a 17-year-old girl, and she drove off the pier. And we got there, and a lot of people were getting in boats, and the water was really choppy, and the helicopters were going up. And I said to my little group there that pull the stretcher out. We're staying right here. Put out the oxygen, put the BVM out. We're all set. The defibrillator's all set to go. And they're like, yeah, that patient's not going to come up here. But sure, it was amazing because one of the guys in the frog outfits comes up with the girl, pretty girl in cardiac arrest. And I had the opportunity to look at Andre Fletcher, who died at the Trade Center.
Yep.
He's a paramedic at Maimonides Hospital. Really good friend, was on the USAR team with me. Mm-hmm. And he was able to lean over, and he had a ladder, and he got the girl on the ladder. And when he got to the point where she was just about at the pier level, you have to realize there's a major difference in height, like maybe 10 feet. He leaned over, grabbed her, and he handed her to me. And I walked over and I put her on a stretcher. And I looked at my wife and I said, do CPR. And she did CPR. And the unit that I work on, actually, the paramedic came over, my partner, but I wasn't working with them. He intubated her. And by the time they got her to the hospital, they had ROS. They had, she had spontaneous respirations, and she had a pulse. She's still alive. She's not doing that well, but what a major thrill was the fact that my wife went on to become a CPR instructor. She didn't do much with EMS. And when she did her CPR instructor, she said, what percentage of time, what's the percentage of saves do I have? And she would tell the students 100%. Because the one time she did CPR,
it worked.
It worked. And I was so proud and thrilled. And, to this day, we tell that story. Even Adam Gottlieb from New York Hospital, he does the critical care. He's a friend. He still tells the story. And he actually came across there. He's in charge of the critical care ambulances. That patient actually was one of his patients recently. And he was able to call me up and say, you know who I had as a patient? That female.
Andre Fletcher, before he came onto the FDNY, I think he was a police officer, wasn't he? He was a cop for a little bit.
I don't know that fact.
Correctly.
I met Andre Fletcher on the USAR team, and I believe we went to the Dominican Republic together for Hurricane George.
I didn't even know he was a USAR guy.
Yeah, he was a rescue guy, and he was a friend. He was a good guy, and he was one of the people that I actually knew pretty well. And one of the things I came across in Kingsburg, New Jersey, the New Jersey REMSCO created a memorial for just EMS people from the World Trade Center. But they didn't just do EMS people, meaning the people who died that were EMS either from the voluntary hospitals or our two EMS folks in the FDNY. If anybody was a EMT who was on a plane and they died, one of the planes that crashed, or at the Pentagon that died, that they were EMT or a paramedic, they actually entered their names onto this spectacular monument, and it's just EMS people. It's amazing to see names of people that I know, like Andre Fletcher. He was a firefighter, and that day he was a firefighter. But because he was a paramedic, his name belonged on that monument, and it's a beautiful monument. If people go out to Kingsburg, New Jersey, it's well worth looking at and seeing.
We'll skip ahead and we'll shorten the rapid fire to 3, like I said, because you've answered most of the questions I originally had very well already. So of the second of the 3 I'll ask you is, you need to eat. of course, when you're out on the street. So there's different places to stop. So across the years, favorite bars, if you're not a bar guy, it's fine. Favorite restaurants to get a good bite to eat on the streets of New York City.
Ah, every borough is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But when I was an EMT and we were sent on a tactical patrol unit to go up to Harlem, we used to stop at 103 and 3 for hot bread and Spanish coffee. And that was with my partner at the time, John Vitale. We used to stop there all the time. And it was cheap. We didn't have any money. So it was like you got a Spanish coffee and a hot bread and cheese with butter coming from a press. And it was $1. It was $1. It was great. I think, in Brooklyn now, I spend a lot of time stopping at Dyker Bagels. They make really good sandwiches and the people are really, really nice. And we used to go to a Greek place where we were 1089 at our corner and we were able to sit down and they made our food in a tray. So if we got a call, it was just a matter of putting the cover on and running out. But it was the fact of being able to sit down in a restaurant was such a great thing. It was sit down with a real fork and knife and just listen to the radio. And the staff knew that if we got a call, we didn't have a lunch break, those covers had to go on and they would zip them closed and we'd run out and hit the button and they hand us the bag and we'd be on our way. There's another place, something Greek in Bay Ridge, another great place to eat. This
yeah, you can pick and choose your spots, that's for sure, across the 5 boroughs. Your screen's frozen, but we can still hear you. So if you could still, assuming you could still hear us, last question there, the rapid fire is, what advice would you give the next generation of FDNY EMTs and paramedics, if you can hear us? And I don't believe the chief can hear us, unfortunately. We were going so good. We weren't having any tech problems. And then, of course, in the rapid fire, it comes up. So we'll get the chief back. I'll ask him that last question. Mark Peck, you see my message there in the chat. I'm sorry I never got back to you with an invitation day. I didn't forget about you. Just got sidetracked with a bunch of stuff. But send me a timeline of your career, and then let's schedule something for early next year. Assuming I haven't gone off to the Fire Academy yet, so we'll wait for Chief Swithers to get back. We'll wrap up the rapid fire. I'll advertise the next episode, and then that'll be the end of that. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in again. And Joe, the memberships just mean, support for the channel. You don't got to pay anything. But I appreciate you asking, and I appreciate you taking the membership. And Mal Feldman is here for another show, or Fieldman, rather, is here for another show. You were here in the Joe Kanaski episode, and I appreciate that. So thank you once again for watching tonight. This is volume 64 of the Best of Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, in which we're chronicling the career of retired FDNY EMS Division Chief Jay Swithers. EMS recently got a new chief. I forget the name of that chief, but I'd like to get him. Is it Chief Fields? Mark Peck, perhaps in the chat, you can fill me in, but we'll fill me in later, actually, because we got Chief Swithers back. Chief,
yeah,
the last question. That's fine. You were saying your restaurants, and then we'll get to the last question, rapid fire. Greek spot in Bay Ridge, and then was there something else you mentioned?
I mentioned something Greek in Bay Ridge was a favorite. And Brooklyn Dyker Bagels on 14th Avenue and 86th Street, another favorite. Santiago's on Bay 16th Street and Cropsey, really good food. And at early days, we used to go to a little bodega place. They made hot bread and cheese on 103rd Street and 3rd Avenue on our way to Harlem with John Vitale. Great partner, great man.
Very nice. And the last question, rapid fire, advice you'd give the new generation of FDNY EMTs and paramedics.
Yeah, well, the new generation is a rough generation. I'm constantly telling people that you need to put into it. It's more about what you could do for EMS, for the fire department, for the citizens of New York, but what you're going to get out of it. I hope that all our new EMTs find themselves the opportunity to go to paramedic school. It became a rule years ago that you couldn't be a paramedic. You couldn't be a lieutenant unless you were a paramedic. And they were trying to change that. But as hard as it is to go to school, let the city make you a paramedic and become a paramedic. And that'll give you the opportunity to become a lieutenant in advance and a captain. There's so many opportunities. Don't let anything pass you. You got to sometimes grab it. If there's a posting for a position as a lieutenant, excuse me, as a to go to the academy, and they're going to train you to do that. Training is great. It's free. I mean, I became an instructor outside first, and I spent a lot of my own money and a lot of my own time to become an instructor. We have great mentors. I feel that anybody going into this, even if they're going into this as a stepping stone to become a police officer or a firefighter, you're going to take this with you and keep it. I believe in the future, and I've said this over and over again, that one day there'll be a paramedic that gets upgraded or moved and becomes a firefighter, that we're going to have that paramedic carrying the life pack on the engine and provide more care and better care. And we're going to have to compensate them. But, right now we have paramedics that just Saturday, I worked with a paramedic firefighter, female, and she goes out as a CFRD person, and she doesn't have the equipment they don't support the training for the paramedic to refresh. They support her to be maintained as a CFRD person, certified first responder. I believe in the future there will be paramedics that are riding the engines, and that would enhance their capability. And I'm seeing it first line when I'm coming from Dyke Heights, and they're giving me a call in Coney Island on West 34th Street and Surf Avenue, which I know I'm not going to get there for a half hour. And there's an engine company standing there, where doing only providing oxygen or only providing CPR at a CFRD level, which is great, but we should, as an agency, support getting paramedics onto the firefighters. And our folks should try to find whatever opportunities to learn and whatever training, just go. Our academy is so robust. Our instructors are so great, so knowledgeable. The best academy in the world. Hands down, it's one of the greatest opportunities. Train.
Well said, Chief. Thank you very much for your time. Stick around. We'll talk off air. Before I say goodnight to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you would like to give?
I did a whole bunch of shout outs, but if my partner, Franklin Felice, and Lauren Hannigan and Sean Barrow are out there listening, and Chris, if you're out there, you're my partners, and I appreciate you. And while I was sick, you guys were there for me, and that was good. And I wish everybody the best. All my friends in FDNY, all the ranks, firefighters, EMS folks, chiefs, captains, lieutenants, and all our partners through the voluntary hospitals, and even our police officers that are out there, giving Narcan to our patients before we're able to get to them, and doing CPR in many cases. Those are my shout outs. My shout outs to my kids, Robbie, James, Megan, and Stephanie, and my wife, Fran. Thank you for the opportunity and helping me along my long journey. And I wish my son was here when the picture went out a couple of different times, but I thought we had it, but I figured it out each time.
Yeah, you did.
And very much important, Jimmy Boyle and his family I went with them on September 11th, and they embraced me and I embraced them. It's really fabulous to have them with me, and all the support from the widows that continue to reach out to me and make me feel good every day that they reach out and they say Happy Christmas and all the holidays and my birthdays and all that stuff. It's incredible. I love EMS. I love the city, and I look forward to potentially, maybe perhaps being the president of Bravo. I'm running for president next week, and we'll see how that goes. But Mike, Tony Napoli was a great chief of communications for EMS, and he's the current president. And he's done a wonderful, fabulous job, and if he continues to be the president, I would back him 100%. And if I become president, I hope that he would back me. We're friends. My friend Jimmy Nealon, who came to EMS with me, and he's a PA now working in cardiology and making a lot more money than I do. But, that's all fine. That's all great. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here, Chief. Appreciate you making the time. I know we've been trying for a little bit to arrange this, so I'm glad that we were finally able to link up. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. A shout out, as always, to everybody that tuned in tonight. John Costello, a shout out to you, my friend. I didn't acknowledge you earlier. I'll acknowledge you now. Whether you were watching on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, of course, it's always appreciated. Without the support of you, the wonderful audience, this show would not be what it is. Coming up next in the Mike DeNueven podcast, as I mentioned earlier, when Chief Swithers was briefly out of the picture, we have John Fleming, who was in the chat earlier, tuning in via LinkedIn, coming on. John was a investigator for 29 years, 1988 until 2017, with New York City's Office of Special Narcotics. It's a law enforcement agency that not many in the city know about. So this Friday, John's going to give us an inside glimpse of what they do and what his role was with that particular investigative agency for the years that he was in it. So that's this Friday at 6. And next Monday, all things considered, barring anything unforeseen, the interview that unfortunately was postponed with John Coughlin will take place. John, of course, former member of the New York City Transit Police's Emergency Medical Rescue Unit, and then later on, upon their merger with the NYPD, the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. So that should be volume 50 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit next Monday, same time, 6 p.m. In the meantime, this has been volume 64 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. For those of you listening on the audio side, from her breakthrough 1995 album, Pieces of You, tonight's outro song is Jewel with Who Will Save Your Soul. And with that said, on behalf of producer Victor and retired FDNY EMS Division Chief Jay Swithers, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Have a great night. Thank you.